We have Matt Tyrnauer on the line. Matt, are you there?
Yeah. Hi, how are you?
Hey, Matt. Fine, although it sounds like you're on a speakerphone. If you could pick up the phone, I'd appreciate it. Matt is the director of Where's My Roy Cohn, which is an extraordinary new movie that Louise and I watched a preview of earlier in the week and was just mind-boggling. Matt, give us a summary of this movie.
Dora Cohn wanted a different son from the son that God gave her. And that imbued him a sense of shame about who he was. His father gave him the language through law and politics to express his shame.
Roy Cohn's contempt for people, his contempt for the law, was so evident on his face that you knew you were in the presence of evil.
Well, Roy Cohn is the link between Joseph McCarthy and Donald Trump. He was a very, very influential power broker and one of the great kind of dark schemers and sort of mobbed up power figures of mid-century.
And how has Donald Trump been informed by his association with Roy Cohn?
He is fully the creation of Roy Cohn. And they met in the 70s, and Cohn mentored Trump. And I think people who I interviewed who knew them at the time said that Donald Trump is Roy Cohn, basically.
Wow. So when is the movie coming out, and where is the movie coming out? How can people find it?
The movie came out last week. It's in theaters, and it's going across the country right now.
So check your local listings.
Absolutely.
Do you have a website for it?
RoyCohnMovie.com.
Roy Cohn, and that's C-O-H-N, RoyCohnMovie.com. Thank you very much for that. And Matt, what should we do? You know, as I mentioned, Louise and I watched the movie, and first of all, it's a mind-boggling biography of Roy Cohn from Army McCarthy days, from actually putting to death Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, right through this insanely corrupt career of his, and his association with Donald Trump as well. What can we do with this information? What should Americans, how should we respond to knowing this?
The reason I made the movie is to show what self-interested power can do. Mm-hmm. Cohn was a very influential lawyer, at a very young age. In his early 20s, he was the prosecutor in the Julius and Ethel Rosenberg spy case. And then J. Edgar Hoover put him at the side of McCarthy, and he really was one of the key figures in the McCarthy witch hunt era. And what he symbolized and what he fomented in U.S. government of the period was the politics of self-interest and demagoguery. And McCarthy was the greatest example of that in our modern history until Trump. So it so happens that there's a direct link between McCarthy and Trump, and that is in the form of Roy Cohn. And what does Trump do? And, by the way, Joseph McCarthy never came close to the presidency. That Trump ascended to the presidency through the quirk of the Electoral College is a horrific reality. But the self-interested politics of Roy Cohn are embodied by Donald Trump. So the McCarthy era, which was our darkest modern political moment, if you don't count Watergate, I suppose, is back with us. And Roy Cohn really was the creature who was the architect of both of these moments, because he was the person who taught Trump everything he knows.
In your movie, you point out that when Donald Trump and his dad, when Donald was working for his dad, Fred was still alive and running his little real estate empire, they had been sued by the federal government for refusing to rent housing units to black people, to African Americans. And Trump turned to Roy Cohn and said, "What do we do?" And Roy Cohn said, "Fight them." And they launched this massive battle against the federal government, which essentially ended up in a tie. A, you want to fill that in a little bit, and B, how does that inform us about what we should expect from Trump going forward? Newsweek yesterday was reporting that that there are some reports coming out of the White House that some of Trump's people have been trying to negotiate, basically, and nobody's sure who they're negotiating with, but that there's discussion in the White House about Trump cutting a deal where all federal and state prosecutions against him drop. No members of his family will ever be prosecuted. Just let them go back to being New York real estate grifters, and we'll give you back your country. And some people have called into the program today saying, oh, wait a minute, if you don't nail this guy, the next guy's going to be even worse. But how does that deal that Trump, where he got busted for discrimination, how does that inform how he's behaving now, and what should that tell us about what we might expect?
Yes, well, I think, again, one of the reasons I made the movie is if you look at the Roy Cohn playbook, you'll understand and almost have a crystal ball into the way Trump's going to behave. What you just outlined about this kind of backroom bargaining that's going on to cut deals is exactly out of the Cohn playbook. The other principle of Cohn is when you are in a flaming defeat, claim victory, and then figure out another way to confuse the conversation and throw out misinformation and basically demagogue the issue. Going back to the kind of meet-cute moment of Cohn and Trump in the 70s around a housing discrimination suit that the Justice Department had brought against Donald Trump and his father, Fred Trump. This has been widely reported. It's one of the more appalling things in Trump's racist past. They were, at the Trump Organization, denying apartments to people of color. When they would go in to meet with rental agents, they would mark the application with a C for colored, and then they would basically throw it out or throw it in the bottom drawer. The Justice Department rightfully went after them. Trump engaged Roy Cohn to defend him and his father, and Cohn did a brilliant thing using his bare-knuckle kind of mob lawyer tactics. He told them to countersue the Justice Department for $100 million. Absurd. The counterclaim was dismissed, of course, but it threw the opponent off balance. And eventually there was a settlement with no admission of guilt, which Trump has paraded out over the decades, saying that there was no admission of guilt. He claimed victory for what was a defeat, but Cohn had done a good job of defending him by using these bully mob attorney tactics, which Trump has adopted and deployed ever since. You see it in the events of last week. All of these diversionary tactics, throwing Mike Pence under the bus, moving toward throwing Giuliani and Barr under the bus if necessary. I would predict that you're going to see that. As Trump becomes more cornered, he'll try to sacrifice everyone around him until he's the last man standing.